Today, I'm so excited to have Mitzi Perdue with us. Mitzi is a businesswoman, an author, a master storyteller. She holds degrees from Harvard University and George Washington University, is the past president of 35,000 member American Agra Women, and was one of the U.S. delegates to the United Nations Conference of Women in Nairobi. Mitzi was a syndicated columnist for 22 years, the author of more than 1,600 newspaper and magazine articles on family businesses, food, agriculture, the environment, philanthropy, biotechnology, genetic engineering, and women's health. Mitzi's also produced and hosted more than 400 half-hour interview shows and is the author of Tough Men, Tender Chicken, Business and Life Lessons from Frank Perdue. And I didn't bargain for this. Her story of growing up as a hotel heiress. A woman of many talents, she's programmed a computer app and is an artist and designer. And she is the founder of winthisfight.org, which is combating human trafficking. And we'll talk more about that. Mitzi has twice been a guest on my Kyle Wilson Inner Circle events and was in my most recent book, Bringing Value, Solving Problems, and Leaving a Legacy, with her chapter titled, and I love this title, My Purpose is to Increase Happiness and Decrease Misery in the World. And I'm so honored today to talk with Mitzi Perdue. Hi, Mitzi.
Hi, and boy, I'm so honored to be on your show. I don't know what to do with myself.
Well, you know, we were introduced to each other from our good friend, Mark Victor Hansen. You know, I started working with Mark in 1994, and I did Chicken Soup for the Entrepreneurial Soul with Mark and Jack. And when Mark says, Kyle, there is one person you've got to meet, and I want you to have her on your podcast. That was Mark. And, you know, I'm so glad we met a while back, and this has been long overdue. You've been to my inner circles and you were in the recent book, and to have you on the podcast now, I'm really excited. We had to make our schedules mesh. You're busy. It's incredible, all the things you're doing. And so it's great to get together today.
I'm so happy. As I said, I don't know what to do with myself. I'm so pleased that this is happening and to be with your audience. I've spoken with some of them just because of previous ones. And guess what? I love them all.
Yeah, it has been fun to watch. You were a guest on the Inner Circle call, and you talked about so many things that intrigued people. Like, and there's some things we're going to get in today about having an ethical will and just different things you learned through, you know, your father and being in business with your late husband, both incredible business entrepreneurs, but you're incredible in your own right with the businesses you've done. And so I love your story, but you know, that's led to a lot of interesting things. And then again, your winthisfight.org, which I do want to wait for that conversation more towards the end, because I want to dive into your journey. But yes, you've had a lot of my people really take interest in the things you're doing and the change you're making on the planet. And so, yeah, I think it's been mutual. They loved you and you loved them. So that's always great to see when that happens. So Mitzi, We'll take a few minutes and just talk about your upbringing. I love your story, but your upbringing, you were raised in a little bit of business royalty, right? With your dad being one of the founders of Sheraton Hotels. Talk a little bit about just growing up and then what helped you get on your journey, you know, finding your own independence, your own voice.
Well, I can think of an instant when possibly I was maybe 10 or 12 years old. And it was very clear to my father it was very clear to me that my father was a very, very successful man. I mean, our summer house had a ballroom that fits 200 people and a stage. And by the way, it's still in the family. And, you know, as a kid growing up, I'm pretty much aware that not everybody else has a summer house with a ballroom that holds 200 people. I think it's a 40,000 square foot edifice, and that was our summer cottage. So, you know, I knew that father was very successful, and he was the co-founder along with my uncle, and he was the president of the Sheraton Hotel Chain. He brought it from no employees to, at the time of his death, 20,000. So the incident that I started out with, I go wandering into his study on a Saturday, and he's working. He's surrounded with papers, and is obviously very busy. And of course, as a kid, I don't mind interrupting. Daddy, what are you doing? And he said that he was studying requests for donations from the Henderson Foundation. Why are you doing that on a Saturday? You could be out playing golf or something, or tennis. And he said, the greatest pleasure that my money has ever given me is in giving it away. And yeah, that sure stuck with me for the rest of my life. That the purpose of money wasn't to, buy designer clothes or have private jets. No, it's to serve people. And then I also grew up with my mother. She was forever telling us as kids, that we've been very lucky and that it's our job to, and this is a direct quote, put back in the bucket. And I don't know if that's just self-evident to everybody. What it meant to me was, you've been given all these things, you owe it to give back. And that led to my theory of what I wanted out of life. And I decided that success, because I certainly got to see it with my father, but my mother also. She wasn't a businesswoman, but she was known as the Queen Bee of Boston society, and if she worked on a charity, it was probably going to be a big success. Well, so my own view of what success is, that it's not measured by what you can get, it's measured by what you can give. And so I wanted to develop a talent stack where I could give back. And I wasn't going to go found a hotel chain and employ 20,000 people. But I thought, I guess I'm influenced by the biblical story of the talents, where the master gives his servants, what I help. I'm not good enough on the numbers, but one was given many coins, and he invested that, and he did well for the master. Another person sort of did medium well. And then one was given one coin and simply buried it so it would be safe. And the employer was absolutely thrilled with the one who invested and quadrupled what the employer had given him, and had no use for the guy who just buried it. Well, I wanted to be the kind who would invest it. And my own particular goal was to develop a talent stack with the things that I would be capable of. And that would involve, since I'm not going to be a business titan, it would involve like communication or writing or speaking, or I wanted, if I was going to give back, it would have to be in the ways that the good Lord gave me to do it. And I've pretty much spent the rest of my life working on different skills that would enable me to give back
and
at the highest level that I can.
And what's so powerful about that is you have gone down your own path, your own unique path. And so I would think there's pressure, right? Growing up in that environment and expectations. And again, back at that time, being a woman, I don't know if that changed. I don't know if your family had different expectations than you going into business. Talk a little bit about that. And also if you had challenges, like a lot of people say, wow, you got the red carpet, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's almost the opposite, right? You have to overcome those things, in particular to find your own voice. So that really impresses me. But were there early challenges or pressures, or potentially you not being able just to step into the role people thought you would step into?
Well, we're talking, I'm 80 years old and proud of it, by the way. 80, everybody,
look amazing.
This is what 80 looks like.
Yeah, amazing.
I was born in 1941, which means I was a war baby. At the time when I would be starting a career, that I think people might be astonished how in the late 1950s and late 1960s or early 1960s, women really weren't encouraged to have careers.
Right.
I'm the first woman in my family who had a job. I think it actually shocked my father that I wanted to work, because I was a hotel heiress. I didn't have to. Right. I think really what was sort of expected in that era if you were a hotel heiress, your job probably was to hook men and have a life of leisure afterwards. I didn't want to do that. I did go to Harvard, and I worked like crazy to get into Harvard. And I studied government and economics because I thought, well, each to his own, but I just thought that you get government right and people are happy. You get it wrong and people are miserable. And a lot of governments getting it right or wrong, in my view, is do they get the economics right? And the economic systems, like particularly in Russia or China before Reagan, both those countries, vast numbers of them were living in poverty. At the time of Reagan, when the economic systems of both China and Russia changed, where they abandoned strict Marxism and enabled people to experience free enterprise, that began the biggest sort of unfolding of global wealth that's ever been. It went from, I think at the beginning of Reagan's, and I don't want to testify in court on this is just my best memory, but I think like the poverty rate was something like 40%. And by poverty, let me explain what I mean by poverty, where people are living like on $1 or two a day,
right?
Where you're sincerely worried where your next meal is coming from. When the economic systems changed, which they did in both countries after Reagan, and not that Reagan was the reason, I'm just saying that this is the time frame that it happened. There's just been an explosion of wealth throughout the world, so that right now, extreme poverty is 10%, not 40%. And I bring all of this up to just say what motivated me. I'm just deeply aware that you get the economic incentives right, and people can escape extreme poverty. They can have happier, better lives. So that's the essence of why economics interests me.
So you went to Harvard and to get education, and again, you have a lot of varied interest, including history and computer and engineering and all kinds of things. But I have heard you talk about, even in your 30s, you struggled a bit with shyness and timidity, and it was very debilitating. And what helped you talk a little bit about that? Because I think more people can relate to that than we have awareness of, right? Anxiety and timidity and all those things. So I think it's important to talk about it. And then what helped you?
Okay, and actually you just touched on something that terrifies me, which is I'm afraid that the stories that I tell in general, that they're completely unrelatable. But shyness, I think a lot of people can relate to that. And in my case, I had a reason for being shy. I had, how about a really severe lisp? And a lisp, now you can hear it, but if it's bad enough, you can also see it. Your tongue's in the wrong place. And people who I would get to know well, over the years would tell me that when they first met me, they assumed I was stupid because of my lisp. And that sort of started a downward spiral where I was sort of afraid to go into a room knowing that people were going to think that I was stupid. And my shyness got worse and worse and worse. So what turned it around? Well, what turned it around was I was working at that point in life. When my father died, I had an inheritance and I put it into agricultural land. And I did, by the way, spend almost 4 years studying agronomy and rural appraisal and agricultural accounting and international food movements. I mean, I put a lot of effort before sinking money into it, but it worked for me as a shy person perfectly because I was a rice grower and you don't have to interact with a whole lot of people. But that did change my life for a reason that I think was unpredictable. I had put a lot of effort into getting the best tenant farmer that I could. And my way of finding the best tenant farmer was, I was living in California at the time, and I'd ask all the people that I could meet in the agricultural community, who's the best farmer in the nearby 3 counties? Give me 3 names. And there was one name that always showed up on all of them. And I asked him if he would farm my rice land, and he agreed. And it became spectacularly successful enough so that with the profits I made from that land, I bought more and more and more. So, I mean, that worked out extremely well. But what does this have to do with being shy? Well, to protect the guilty, I'm going to make up the man's name. I mean, he was a hero in a way, except let's call him, I was going to use your name just for the fun of it, but we'll call him Peter Smith. Peter Smith used to describe himself as the world's greatest underachiever because he had enormous IQ. It was like over 200. And his plan for his life was to write a great book that would benefit mankind. And he was spending a lot of time, like filling a whole garage full of file folders on information that he would put together for this great book that would benefit mankind. And it even had a title, Life, an Owner's Manual. Well, when he was 68 years old, and he'd been working for me for a few years, or I guess working with me is a better way of putting it, I learned that he had seemingly fatal heart disease. It was severe enough so that, say, if he was visiting me in my office, he couldn't walk across the room without just crippling angina, heart pain. And his doctors had told him that they didn't think they could keep him alive long enough to get to the Mayo Clinic to have quadruple bypass surgery. Now, this is dire, right? And anybody with that diagnosis would just be, what could be worse? But there was something worse. And the thing that was worse was he suddenly realized, all my life I've been preparing to write this great book, and I'll never be able to because I'm going to die before I can even start it. And then what to me feels like a miracle happened. I heard of something called the Pritikin Clinic, which to this day has extraordinary record of helping people with heart disease. And I talked him into going for a month. And here's the miracle. When he came back, he had lost like 10 pounds. It was diet, meditation, exercise, just attitude. It just, as far as I can tell, it cured him because he was able to walk for like 10 or 15 miles a day. His doctor said, your heart has revascularized. This is a miracle. And I said, Peter, this is the most wonderful thing in the world. Now you can write your book. And he said, yeah, I just need to do a little bit more research. And well, at that point, I knew he never would. And as a matter of fact, he lived till 90 and he never did write his book. But I realized at that moment when he wasn't going to write his book, I mean, he said he was going to write his book, but I knew he wasn't going to. I started looking at my own life thinking, no, I've been putting things off. What I would really like to do, more than anything in the world, would be I would love public speaking. I would love to go out in the world. I'd like to be a normal being instead of somebody so shy that I can't enter a room. And so what's blocking me? Well, number one, my lisp. So I said, I'm going to do something about this. I went to a speech therapist, and I think we're talking at a guess, maybe 1978 now. And I'm going to guess that speech therapists may be different today, but back then, this speech therapist told me, at your age, there's nothing we can do for you. You have to get it young. I went to another speech therapist. She said exactly the same thing. There's nothing we can do for you. I decided to go to a third. And the third, by the way, was a 2-hour round trip to get to her and quite expensive. And I told her I want to overcome my lisp. And she said, I'm terribly sorry, there's nothing we can do for you, but I'd be happy to take your money. You can come. And so for the next 8 months, a couple of times a week, I would be going to the speech therapist and no progress of any sort because I couldn't hear what I was doing wrong. Then I had no idea what to do with my tongue to put it in the right place, and I didn't have the muscles to do it. And it was just absolutely no progress of any sort. Until somewhere around 9 months, I began to be able to hear the difference between a correctly formed S and then the muscles in my tongue. The reason back then that they wouldn't try to take on a lisp patient was because if the muscles have completely atrophied, there's nothing to form an S with. But anyway, when I could hear the difference, then just bit by bit, and by the end of 9 months, I had overcome my lisp, and I also that meant that my biggest reason for shyness was gone. But there was another part too, and that was a complete phobia of public speaking. So I went to the Business and Professional Women's Clubs. Actually, it's not quite that way. There was a cold call from somebody saying, "Would you like to learn public speaking? Join the Business and Professional Women's Club." And I said yes. And when I went into the first class, the teacher, her name was Robbie Robinson. There were maybe 15 women in the class, and she said she sized me up immediately. She said she could see that I was insufferably shy. And she said that she rearranged how her first class was just to deal with my case. She said that the class started out with asking everybody to say their name and where they were from. But at this point, since I'm so shy, I was thinking, I'm in the back of the room, of course. And she said, for this one time, you can hang on to the chair in front of you as you say your name and where you're from. And I wasn't even sure I could manage that. But at the end of it, after 14 weeks, I got a job in television.
Wow.
So I think I'm living proof that you can overcome shyness and you can learn public speaking.
That's amazing, Mitzi, because I know you told me before in your 30s, taking a phone call from the school, you would have to, you were just so terrified of even having a phone conversation. So
I could sit on the edge of my bed for half an hour, a call that I had to make, and was going to make because, my son's education is at stake, but it could take me half an hour to work up the courage.
So
and look what burst forth once I wasn't handicapped by the lisp, and once I'd had some public speaking training.
It's a little bit of a theme where people talk about their biggest obstacles oftentimes lead them to their biggest victories, right? And that's certainly been the case for you.
Actually, it was the case with my father also. Is it okay to jump around a whole lot?
Of course.
Because father, towards the end of his life, I bet there are few people other than a national politician who engaged with so many people on such a broad scale. He had 400 hotels at the time of his death, 20,000 employees. He was head of the Chamber of Commerce. He had loads of public speaking, loads of interacting with people, but it didn't start out that way. His story was a little bit like mine, except a different flavor. When he was 26 years old, he realized that he wasn't getting anywhere in life. His own mother told my mother, "Don't marry Ernest. He can never stick with anything. You'll end up poor." Well, so father was motivated to go to whatever the equivalent of the Yellow Pages was back in 1923, and found a career guidance counselor, a company whose business is, it's still in business, Johnson O'Connor. And he took, I think he told me that it was like 8 hours of every possible test you can think of. And at the end of it, Johnson O'Connor said, in my career, I have never met somebody who had less effective human relation skills. He said, you're clearly a bright fellow, but what I would recommend for you is a career as a scientist. Father had graduated from MIT, so he was equipped to be a scientist. Work in a laboratory by yourself and go invent things, and you can make a living that way. Well, father told me that he wasn't going to follow that advice. He said, he reasoned correctly, I believe, that whatever success you want in life, it's probably going to come through interacting with other people. That, being on your own, you can get somewhere, but you're not going to be all you can be if you lack people skills. And so he spent the rest of his life studying. Like, he told me that first of all, he took the Dale Carnegie course, right. But then he said that he would reread it every 10 years. And mother told me the same thing, by the way. She would also reread it every 10 years. He took psychology courses. He would read books in psychology. he cultivated famous psychologists that, I don't know if you're in this field, you'd recognize the name, but Eddie Bernays, known as the father of modern advertising, or B.F. Skinner, who was famous for some branch of psychology, but they would be regular guests in our home, and Father would be talking with them and learning from them. So he had an absolute he took salesmanship courses. He took public speaking courses. He simply transformed himself into somebody with extraordinary speaking skills, who was an absolute, almost leading light in the field of hospitality.
You know, that's so interesting because you did the same thing, right? So he actually created that example for you. And here you took your challenge and the thing that scared you the most, and even against the advice of others, you went down this path to overcome the lisp and learn to, improve talking. How long did that take? Like, was that a long period of time? Like, continual
to be completely
improvement
over the
over
list?
time?
Yeah. All right, as well as I can remember, once I knew how to form it correctly, I didn't want a single time of saying it wrong. So I sort of did total immersion, get it right from now on, and very extraordinarily hard for a few weeks. I mean, I can remember like being on a phone call thinking, can I do this? Can I do this? Yeah, I gotta do it. And I've been reading a little bit about how long it takes to form a habit and how long it has to make it really sink in. Well, I tried for all I was worth just to get it right from now on. And, if you were to ask me, would you imitate your lisp? First of all, please don't. Please don't ask me to. But second, I would deeply resist even imitating the former lisp, because I'm terrified of not staying in the habit of getting it right. I mean, and by the way, that's illogical, and I recognize it, but nevertheless, it's in there.
Well, no, and the total immersion, it sounds like that's what happened when you went to the public speaking class as well. For you to have a job shortly after, 3 or 4 months after, you must have just gone all in. So you do have that tenacity, right? You do have that.
But there was another little voice in the back of my head, which is I was thinking of Peter Smith, not his real name. I was thinking he knew what he wanted, but he didn't do what it took to get there. And I knew him well enough to be pretty sure of what I'm about to say. I think he was afraid of failure. I think that he was afraid that if he actually sat down and wrote the great book and it wasn't a great book and it was a failure, that his life would be meaningless. And then I thought that meant that he did the one thing guaranteed to make his life meaningless. And by the way, at the end of his days, he was terribly depressed because he was the world's greatest underachiever. I didn't want that. I wanted to redefine failure, where if I fell flat in my face, great, that means I tried. And so for me, failure is not trying, not giving it your all. So I don't mind failing. I fail right and left. I don't want to talk forever about all the times I've failed, but to my mind, failure is part of the price of success. But you fall flat in your face and you pick yourself up, and maybe you've learned a lot along the way. And
on this topic, you mentioned you're 80 and you're incredibly vibrant. You're one of the quickest.
That's because you have to eat chicken.
And we'll be talking about Perdue chicken here shortly, because I love some of the business principles you and your husband had. And we definitely want to talk about an ethical will. I've had people in my inner circle tell me that so impacted them, and they're putting together their own processes to talk about. But kind of staying in the same vein, Mitzi, where you so quickly respond to messages, so quickly, you do tend to be like, yes, let's go do it. Let's go do this interview. And these aren't things you're getting paid on, and rarely do you promote. You're promoting your charities. What is that passion to just keep showing up and not just taking massive amounts of time off? Like, what drives you to keep showing up?
Well, can I get religious on you?
Of course.
There's a quote from Mother Teresa that totally guides my life. And I'm feeling really presumptuous even mentioning her name. But here goes. Well, I have to, there's a phrase that guides my life, but let me tell you the context of it. Mother Teresa was living in India. It might have been, was it Calcutta? Anyway, whatever city in India. And she had a really pretty good life. She was a teacher in a girls' school for the uber wealthy. And she never had to worry about her next meal. She had a pretty good life. But she would look out and see the incredible poverty and distress, particularly of the lepers who would just die in the streets. And she wanted to do something about this, but she did have this vow of obedience to her order. She went to the head of her order and said, I'd like to leave being a teacher for the children of the wealthy, and I'd like to go out and help the lepers in the streets. And the head of her order said, you can't do that. You won't make any difference. I think there's something like 10,000 people a day who die of leprosy right in our area. You can't make any difference. And here was her answer. And it's a thing that, I have to say this with every bit of humility that I can muster, because, I'm so beneath her to even say this, but here goes. The poet that guides my life, she answered her superior, it's immoral to be discouraged by the magnitude of a problem. The good that we can do, we must do. And that makes all the sense in the world to me. The good that we can do, we must do. So if there's some good that I can do, I must do it.
Wow. So powerful. And you exemplify that. And so I think that's why, I keep inviting you back to share with my audiences, because it's so profound. And the biggest challenge I have interviewing you is there's so many directions we could go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, again, when I was reading your bio, it was a bunch of different things I had gathered and put together, and then I had to cut it in about a fifth, because you have been so eclectically involved on so many levels. And I think that is the accumulation of you just continuing to show up and make a difference. Even to this day, you said you told us on a previous call, you study code, you study all kinds of, you study medicine. And so have you always are you a researcher, by the way? Do you like to research? Do you like to teach? What is your secret sauce? Do you know? If we had to get it down to one or two things.
I think I could boil it down to endless curiosity. But then I sometimes examine, when am I happiest? And number one is public speaking. So right now I'm happy. I mean, oh, wow. It just occurred to me that I can answer that question more profoundly than I thought I was going to. And it's in the form of a question for you, and you don't have to answer, but here's the question. What's the greatest pleasure in life? And by the way, for the purposes of my question to you, it can't involve eating, sleeping, or sex. Well, here's why, because everybody likes that. That's not going to differentiate you. At least I assume everybody likes that. So can you name something? And this isn't a forever answer. You could change your mind in 5 minutes, but just when you just think it's all coming together and you're happy and life is good, greatest pleasure in life.
Yeah, obviously for me, it's connection with people I care about, right?
But, people have enormously different answers to that. I mean, for some, it's, for my brother, I think it would be playing his oboe in a group. For my sister, she's a hostess to the core, and I think she just loves having her house full of people, usually for a cause. Other people, it's spending time with your grandchildren or playing with your dog. And for me, I've got a number of possible candidates. I really enjoy coding. But no, the number one thing that makes me feel that I'm loving this is communication. I love hearing people and I love listening to people. Oh, gee, I left out. I love speaking to them. The whole ball of wax, connecting. And it seems awfully close to your answer.
And I think of some people in my world that at their core, they're teachers. And what I notice is a teacher isn't really looking for the interaction. You interact. I think of Glenn Morshower, who was recently on, he's been in 250 movies and shows. Glenn will show up on Clubhouse, have a huge audience, and he will have a person, he'll just go on and on and on talking to, because he's so curious about them. And he really does want to connect versus pontificate. And I'm
not against pontificating, but I don't think I can get away with it. So,
well, I've never witnessed that with you, though. I've witnessed you really, there is teacher in you, but I think you nailed it with communication. You love to communicate. You love
the feeling of connection.
Share a good idea, but you want feedback. You want there to be, you're not
I want it
proselytizing. You're actually wanting to, again, let's add that word curious in as well. You want the feedback as well from the listener.
Well, it's the connecting, and if I can share something useful, I've gone to heaven. But on the other hand, if I'm going to listen and hear something, and it doesn't even have to be great. It just, I'm thinking of people that I talk with. Well, I end up, because of Win This Fight, I end up talking with a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, particularly people who've been trafficked, and they may not be giving me some huge insight on life, but I get to hear their story, and it just, I hope they know that it's landing on somebody who really cares.
Well, the first time we talked, you talked about winthisfight.org, which is something that you founded, and you have done a lot of amazing things to help raise not just money, but awareness, and actually, get on the offensive about how to win some battles in the human trafficking. And I was so moved by it. Members of my inner circle that, have been involved on different levels with your group. We took the book that you were recently in, Bringing Value, Solving Problems, Leaving a Legacy. I'll hold it up here for our YouTube and Instagram people. Mitzi was in it along with Bob Berg and Dennis Waitley and Hal Elrod, Ray Higdon and others. Powerful book. But we made sure all the launch proceeds went to your organization. And it's probably one of my favorite stories to tell people when I talk about our books, that we always pick a charity, because what a noble charity. And you're someone I totally trust. Share a little bit about how the idea came and some of the things you've done and continue to do to move the needle on awareness, funding, and being on the offense.
Well, how I got involved was when I first heard about human trafficking, which is really, really recent. I'll confess I'm something of a newbie in this. It was like 2.5 years ago, but I heard a speaker, his name was Paul Hutchinson, talk about rescuing little girls like 10, 12 years old who were being forced to have sex with strangers 10, 12, 20 times a night. Can you imagine? I have a girlfriend who was raped maybe 40 years ago once, and it still interferes with her ability to trust people. It casts a very long shadow. And I'm thinking, but this happened to her when she was an adult. What happens if you're a kid and this thing happens to you? And I was speaking with a person I take to be an expert this morning, who was saying that your chances of being rescued are 1 in 100. And the life expectancy of those little girls, if they weren't rescued, is on average 7 years. They're going to die of suicide, overdose, or being murdered for their organs. And I thought, I've never heard of anything more ghastly. And then I began learning that, no, it doesn't just happen in some far off country. The United States is a magnet for it, because the traffickers go where the money is. And the United Nations estimates right now that there are 40 million people who are being enslaved. And to put that number in context, at the height of the Pacific, I was trying to say the Atlantic slave trade, there were 15 million people in slavery. There are 40 million today. This just shouldn't happen today. And so what can I do about it? Well, there are several approaches, but the one that excites me most and that I think, if it all comes together, could move the needle. If you're a trafficker, okay, imagine something extraordinarily unlikely. You are a trafficker and you're running 4 girls in Manhattan, New York. I've had several people in law enforcement tell me that you could easily make $4 million, that you could be making $1 million a year, tax-free, and they're not going to testify against you because you have them so terrified that your odds of doing jail time, and the figure I'm about to give now is a global figure, your odds of doing jail time for putting people through all this misery is less than 1 in 100. It's the fastest growing crime in the world. And it's the fastest growing crime in the world. It's the second largest source of criminal revenue in the world, is because the profits are amazing. And the chances of having any penalty for it are they approach zero. So what could be done to stop this? Enter an idea. And by the way, what I'm about to share with you, it comes from a number of people, but my biggest source of information is a man, his name is Kevin Sullivan, and he's head of the Anti-Money Laundering Training Academy. Now, what does money laundering have to do with human trafficking? And I've just asked you to imagine that you are a trafficker in Manhattan and that you bring in $1 million a year. You can't spend it. $1 million. And by the way, I want you to guess, and I hope you give a wrong answer, but this is like 4 inches of $100 bills. Aren't they pretty? I love $100 bills. How much money do you think I'm holding up? 4 inches.
This is a wild guess.
Well, I want you to be wrong. So
yeah, I'm going to say 40,000.
Damn. Or excuse me, I'm a lady. Darn, you got it exactly right.
No.
Yeah, you got it just right.
Okay. I did not know that. That was a pure guess. I was
good.
say
Good
20.
on you.
I'm like, it's probably more, but it's definitely
good on you. It's play money, of course.
Okay.
No, it's not. I just want people to not come rob me.
It looks kind of real, but
no. In fact, it really is play money.
Yeah. Very cool.
Okay, it's play money. But $1 million. I can't do math in my head fast enough, but it's 22 pounds, and you can't spend more than $10,000 at a time without coming to the attention of the feds. You want your $250,000 Lamborghini, you can't come in and just plunk down cash, because if you spend more than $10,000, you have to, and you're the dealer. Sorry, you want to pay it in cash. Pay cash, but the dealer has to go report it to the feds. And you, Mr. Trafficker, don't want to come to the attention of the feds. So you have to launder the money. You can't spend illegally obtained money, because anything over $10,000, somebody is going to say, where did you get that money? And you can't very easily say, I got it from trafficking 4 girls in Manhattan. Isn't going to work. So you have to launder it. How do you launder it? Now, that's what the Anti-Money Laundering Training Academy teaches people. If there's no such thing as dirty money that didn't come on the back of some kind of suffering and crime. But I've heard estimates. Well, I won't give you an estimate. I will give you a fact. This is a member of the New York State Police, whose specialty is financial crimes. And he told me, and the statistic I'm going to give is a couple of years old, but I bet it's still active. He said that in the course of a typical month, he would get 4,000 SARs. I bet you'd like to know what a SAR is. Mm-hmm. Suspicious Activity Report.
Okay.
If you're a teller at a bank and somebody plunks down a whole lot of money and they can't say where they got it, you're going to tell your supervisor, they're going to look into it, and they're going to file a suspicious activity report. He's retired, but the retired police officer, financial crimes expert, told me that of the 4,000 SARS or suspicious activity reports, he and I don't know how many people were in his office. I'm going to guess probably a couple, or maybe he was alone. I need to find this out. But he said, well, since you got the other answer much too right, give another guess. You have 4,000 suspicious activity reports you're getting each month. How many can you go into?
20.
2 to 3.
Maybe, yeah, makes more sense. Yeah.
And because if you're investigating a suspicious activity report, and
he's got to take the most outrageous one, the most extreme one, right?
Well, he told me a story of one where it's something that just it looked not so bad. This woman, she comes into the bank and she deposits like a couple of $1,000s. Where did it come from? And she said, well, I'm a limousine driver. But then, in a few months, she had pretty quickly racked up $30,000, and an alert teller thought this looked suspicious. And I'm going to jump ahead in the story, but he got this, and a very quick way of finding out if something funny is going on, he just casually, something that takes a few minutes, looked to see if she had a limousine driver's license. Nope. Well, she worked for a company. Maybe they had a license and somehow she was tagging on it. Nope. And I'm skipping probably 10 layers, but through her and with the right subpoenas and whatever, and then there's something called the Wayback Machine, where you can look at what their internet presence was before they scrubbed it. It finally led to pretty much, I think it was the Genovese family, a mafia kingpin that he was able to put behind bars for years. So that's what somebody in financial crimes, but he said, if we had more people looking at financial crimes, we could make a dent, because right now you're a trafficker. There's nothing to demotivate you from trafficking, because you're going to make immense amounts of money, and your odds of a financial crimes person going after you just aren't high. Well, so what if we could increase the amount of financial crimes, of investigations? And I think there are ways, because one of the people who works with Win This Fight, she's a Harvard Business School graduate. And for 20 years, she's been involved in fintech, financial technology. And she has a way that it's proprietary, so I can't get too deep into it. Not only that, I'm not qualified to explain it terribly well, but I've seen it, and various investors are excited about it. What if we could ramp up the ability to keep the traffickers, how about scared of investigations, of doing time? And you put one trafficker away, a low-level, street-level trafficker, you're going to save 100 people from being trafficked. Because if you're a trafficker, again, your career probably won't extend beyond 15 years, because a gang member or somebody's going to be mad at you and do you in. It's not a good career choice for long term, for longevity.
And of course, this is happening all over the world too, right? And so it's
40 million people in every country.
Yeah.
But I'm going to bet that every town over 20,000 has somebody who's doing something terrible.
Right. And it's like the Mother Teresa quote, every activity is going to have a ripple effect in the positive direction. Whether it's awareness, whether it's helping fund things to help identify these traffickers. And so it all adds up, right?
We actually have two major thrusts for attacking human trafficking. One is long-term, and it's very exciting. And anybody who wants to get involved in funding this, please contact me. But then there's a lower level one that has much more immediate impact. And I'll give an example. It's called Support Our Survivors. And we have right now, it won't sound like a lot, and yet the multiplication of it's enormous. We have from donations $100,000 in the bank to use for the following purpose. We give out $20,000 grants to anti-trafficking organizations, but it's not free money for them. I'll tell you how it worked in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The North Star Institute, they agreed to accept our $20,000, but they would it would be a matching fund where in the end they raised $40,000. So $20,000 resulted in $60,000 of donations, but almost as good, or it's hard to assess what's as good, but that meant just tons of radio, television, newspapers who were covering this. And so it both gave them more funds to carry out their programs, and their programs, their specialty is rehabilitation and restoration of people who've been trafficked. So $60,000 that they didn't have before, and then vast amounts of educational information going out over radio, television, and newspaper. And it's getting even bigger because there's an organization, this will happen on September 30th, but I have another $20,000 to give to an organization in Dallas. And the way we've worked it out is, you'll see that I'm holding up here a treasure chest. This treasure chest, I sent away for Amazon.com, and we're going to put a chain around it and a padlock, and the padlock has a combination. When they raise $80,000, I will give them the combination, and they can open the treasure chest and take the $20,000 check. So $20,000 will raise $80,000, but just because it's kind of, attention getting, we're expecting radio, television, newspapers. There's even a billboard company that may be talking about this. So what I love is, each time we have one of these Support Our Survivor events, A, it helps the people on the ground deliver services, but B, it raises awareness.
Lancaster, Pennsylvania, by the way, that's Michael Manthe and Jerry Horst. And I know you spoke at their event.
I did.
What amazing group of people, right?
Actually, I spoke this year, and that was to coincide with handing over this nice check. I love them. And the people of Lancaster, I'm just blown away by their generosity.
When I started my inner circle, I started it in Dallas and Los Angeles, and eventually I added Philadelphia, and it was a bunch of, Boston, New York, Washington, DC, Philly people. And then it was the Lancaster, Michael Manthe, Jerry Horst, Dave Zooks of the world, that again, what a great combination of diversity, if you will, of entrepreneurs coming together, and just really big hearts, amazing people. So yeah, great feedback I received from everyone that attended that event and got to hear you speak and got to meet you, sign books. Yeah. So Mitzi, you mentioned short-term, long-term. Short-term, for what you're talking about, is there a way people can donate to help with that?
If they have their smartphone handy, or if they don't, if they can write this down, the donations from Lancaster, they were all done through smartphones. It just amazed me. Can you imagine $40,000 in smartphone donations?
Wow.
And I'm holding up my smartphone right now, and I'm going to, if I can do this, I want to walk. It's not opening.
Well, I think just tell us the text number.
Text 55312, and you text win, like win this fight. And it will take you to a place. I think it first takes you to a place where, if you just want to learn more about it, and then if you still want to do more, I invite you to make a $5 donation. And I would love to have, a $5 donation means a lot. But then in the case of Lancaster, they were giving enough so that it ended up being $40,000.
Amazing. Yeah.
I'm not expecting that to happen everywhere. So, if somebody, $5, a cup of Starbucks coffee or something, do it. And because I really would like large numbers. If you gave me a choice of large numbers of people or a few huge checks, I think I'd go for the large number. On the other hand, if it's both, I'm not going to quarrel.
Well, text 55312 win, put win in the text, and then it's going to take you to a site where you can donate $5, $10, $50, $100, whatever it may be. And Mitzi, you get alerted to those donations, right?
Oh, I see them as soon as they're made.
Yeah. So we'll know who's doing it. So thank you in advance for everyone that's able to support winthisfight.org. And what's the long-term plan? And if people want to reach out, which I know I've had multiple people in my group join you in this fight. And so what's the long-term?
Okay. Short-term is support our survivors. Long-term is let's cut the head off the snake. Let's make it less appealing as a career choice for a bad guy. And right now it's very appealing because immense amounts of money and almost no downside. We want to change that equation. We want to make it so that you're actually terrified to try to get money because you can't spend it. If you spend it, you may end up in jail. That's the long-term goal. And by the way, I've been thinking, we all know about return on investment, ROI. I want people to think in terms of return on donations, because if you can help put one bad guy behind bars, that's 100 people saved from just unthinkable suffering. And you save 100 like little girls from not being miserable to begin with. It's going to ripple on for generations. If they're not harmed by being trafficked, you're not going to have medical bills of $15,000 a month for restoration. You're not going to have people who are scared to have relationships. They can be productive, happy members of society, tax paying. The ripple effect for humanity is endless if you can stop trafficking. And my vote for stopping trafficking is make it less profitable.
So long-term, it's getting the network together that can do a better job of tracking and discovering who these perpetrators are.
Yes, and we have ways of doing that. And I invite people to come to winthisfight.org. And you'll see ways we're doing it. By the way, we are today updating the website. So I don't know if you might see it under construction, but come anyway.
Okay. And we'll at the end, we'll tell people how they can get a hold of you as well. I do want to touch on, so it's a powerful thing you're doing, Mitzi, amazing. So thank you for everything you're doing with winthisfight.org. And you inspire me, you inspire so many other people. I want to go back and ask you a little bit about your husband, Frank Perdue, who's passed away, but you guys put together what you call an ethical will, and it's really a powerful concept. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Yeah, among the more meaningful things that Frank and I ever did together was towards the end of his days. He passed at age 85, but somewhere around age 80, he realized, that he was going to be leaving those who came after him, a lot of material wealth. But he and I had both observed so often that wealth doesn't necessarily lead to happiness. Wealth without values, people end up, drugs, alcoholism, trouble with the law, 20 marriages. There's so many things that wealth enables you to go wrong. He wanted those who came after him to have healthy, productive lives where at the end of their days, they could think, I've led a good life. And so, he concluded that it was values that help people have a life that at the end of it, they can feel I've led a good life. And so we spent 3 days, and this was total immersion, where we didn't do anything else for 3 days except Frank didn't type and I do. So I would take notes of his ideas. We came up with like 50 values that could help people have a happier, healthier, more satisfying life. And then Frank realized nobody's going to memorize 50. Let's cut it down to 10. And we created an ethical will of 10 things. And I recommend this to everybody because it so clarifies what your values are. And it's of enormous value to those who come after. And I'll share a couple of them.
Okay.
Now, number one, be honest. Number two, be somebody who others are justified in trusting. Number three, if you say you'll do something, do it. And my favorite of all of them is, if you want to be happy, think what you can do for somebody else. On the other hand, if you want to be miserable, think what's owed to you. Another one that I just cherish because if everybody would do this, would be so far ahead. Treat everybody with respect, no exceptions.
Those are powerful. Mitzi, there's so much gold. This is our fourth conversation, and there's always so much gold, so many different directions we could go. But I really want to encourage people to dig deeper into Mitzi Perdue. Tell us a little bit how people can get a hold of you, where they can find your books, your audio programs, and learn more about you. What's the best way to do that?
What a flattering question. You make me suffer. But seriously, Amazon.com, just look up Mitzi Perdue. But there is an exception, though, because there's a cookbook that's listed under me, and it was pirated, and it's awful, but it makes it look as if it's me. So don't get a cookbook there. But if you want, like, My Life as an Heiress, I didn't bargain for this, or what I'm really proud of is the story of Frank Perdue. And then if you're in family businesses, I've got 3 books on how to make your family business last. If you would like a nice bunch of freebies, come to MitziPerdue.com. And Perdue is spelled Perdue. So MitziPerdue.com. And I invite you to get all sorts of free chapters just for downloading.
Yeah, you have so many valuable resources on that page. And I also want to mention, as we said earlier, you're part of the Bringing Value, Solving Problems, Leaving a Legacy book, which you check every one of those boxes. And if people want to go get that book, they can go to bringingvaluebook.com, bringingvaluebook.com. It's going to take them to Amazon. I think it's $12 for the book. But if they'll send an email after they buy the book to gifts@bringingvaluebook.com, they're going to get a bunch of free gifts. And one of them will be a package Mitzi provided that has 3 books: How to Make Your Family Business Last, How to Strengthen Your Family Legacy with Newsletters, and How to Communicate Values to Children so they'll love it. We also have gifts from Ray Higdon, Dennis Waitley, Seth Mosley, Tom Ziegler, and myself. But make sure, no matter what, and go to MitziPerdue.com, check out all the things she's doing. Do send the text, and I'm going to put that in the show notes as well. But I'll say it's worth repeating one more time. So send a text to 55312 and put "win" in the subject. And Mitzi, you're amazing. I want to have you back again. There's so many directions we can go, but what an inspiring story. I mean, you just keep showing up. You keep trying to make a difference in the world, and so much value you have brought to me, you've brought to my group. Now you've brought to my podcast listeners. Really, it's my great honor. I owe Mark Victor Hansen for one more thing now, and that's introducing me to you.
Thank you. I feel so humbled hearing you. Thank you.
Well, hey, it's been amazing, and looking forward to talking soon.
Me too.